Hello, you can call me a crazy woman. What I gave to my son-in-law that day was for my daughter. That's how I felt. But it had been so long since I had been with a man, and I regained all the senses I had lost. I'll tell you all about what happened that day and why it had to happen. Like and subscribe, please. I am a middle-aged woman living alone in the countryside. Not long after giving birth to my first daughter, my husband cheated on me and left home. Life was tough, but I raised my daughter by doing all sorts of hard work. I earned a living by helping with farm work in the village and working at a supermarket. My son-in-law and I are 14 years apart. I got married early and had a daughter, and my son-in-law is a bit older than my daughter. My daughter did not get a job after graduating from high school and worked part-time. She said she met my son-in-law while working part-time at a bar. My son-in-law owns 3 bars. He drives a luxury foreign car, but he has been through all kinds of hardships. The first bar he started quickly went bankrupt, and he struggled a lot. He tried again and again to raise funds eventually. My son-in-law now owns 3 successful bars, and he owns 2 more bars that are not doing so well, but he can afford to pay his employees' salaries. My son-in-law was living alone because he couldn't get married while running his business. My daughter started working at one of the bars my son-in-law runs. My son-in-law initially didn't have much interest in my daughter. He probably wasn't interested in my daughter, who was in her early 20s when he was over 30. My son-in-law once drove my daughter home after work. They had a drink at a bar near my daughter's house. They talked about this and that and ended up sleeping together that day. After that, my daughter and son-in-law started living together. My daughter, who doesn't know how to save money, had a lot of debt at the time, and my son-in-law paid it off. From my point of view, he is a very grateful person. My son-in-law spoke casually about it. He said it wasn't a lot of money for him. My daughter praised my son-in-law to me until she was dry. I also always thanked my son-in-law. I was still grateful to my son-in-law, but my daughter's gratitude was only temporary. My daughter, who had been a housewife living with my son-in-law, wandered around day and night. My son-in-law saw her walking arm in arm with another man and called my daughter's name loudly. But my daughter ran away with that man. After that, my daughter didn't answer the phone, even when my son-in-law called, and she came home a few days later. My daughter got angry at my son-in-law for misunderstanding and left the house. My son-in-law gave up on marriage then. There were always a lot of women around my son-in-law. Women approached him just by looking at his luxury car. My son-in-law was very hard after my daughter left home. My son-in-law came to see me out of courtesy. He told me everything that had happened with my daughter and said he was going to end his relationship with my daughter. My son-in-law, who had promised to rebuild my shabby country house, was such a kind person. When he told me the story of how he was hurt because of my daughter, I couldn't help but cry. I am also a lonely woman who lives by working at a supermarket alone. I spent my time worrying about my only daughter. I lived hoping that my daughter would meet a good man and settle down soon. I was relieved to see my daughter living with my son-in-law, but I was shocked when my son-in-law came and told me what had happened. I made dinner for my son-in-law. After dinner, my son-in-law talked a lot. My son-in-law talked about how hard it was after my daughter left home, how he lived, and how much he struggled. When my son-in-law talked about his hardships, I cried too. I cried with a sense of sympathy, thinking about how I had lived and struggled just as much as my son-in-law. My son-in-law and I cried. My son-in-law thanked me for listening to him. I was grateful to my son-in-law. Although he had only lived with my daughter for a short time, he came to see me out of courtesy. My son-in-law said he had no choice but to break up with my daughter, and I told him to do as he wished. And I hugged my crying son-in-law. My son, your heart must be hurting a lot? I comforted my son-in-law by hugging him and saying this. At these words, my son-in-law cried like a child. He cried for a while and then started acting strangely. I slept with a man for the first time in a long time that day. I was out of it for a while, but when I came to, he was catching his breath. That day, I put him to sleep. Like putting a young son to sleep, I patted his back to sleep. I don't even remember how many times I did it with that man that day. I was so embarrassed, but I thought letting my son-in-law do as he wished was a way to wash away a little bit of my daughter's sin. But I also enjoyed it. My son-in-law gave me something that no other man could give me. The next morning, I prepared a meal for my son-in-law, and he ate hastily as if he was hungry. I was so pleased to see him eating. After eating, my son-in-law left. I felt strange when I sent my son-in-law off. I wasn't worried about my daughter or sorry for my son-in-law, but I missed my son-in-law. I'm going. When my son-in-law said this, I unknowingly asked, "When will you come again?" I was surprised at this question that came out unknowingly. My son-in-law didn't answer and just left. My son-in-law went home that day, put all of my daughter's belongings outside, and contacted her to pick them up. My daughter went and picked up her things without saying much. But my son-in-law said he wasn't that heartbroken. I thought I wouldn't be able to see my son-in-law again after that day. But my son-in-law came to see me once every 2 or 3 days. Whenever my son-in-law came, I let him do whatever he wanted. I thought doing so was apologizing to my son-in-law on behalf of my daughter who had sinned. I thought so, but I was very sorry when my son-in-law left our house, saying he was going back. A while ago, my son-in-law said this, "Mother, I'll take you to where I live soon." I cried when I heard that. I told my son-in-law not to say such things. I said I had no other desire than to apologize to him on behalf of my daughter. My son-in-law said, "Just think so." I couldn't help but smile at his words. And a few days ago, my son-in-law sent a truck. He told me to load all my belongings onto it. I reluctantly loaded my belongings onto the truck. I wonder if this is okay? But I'm just going to go with the flow. I do housework and cook delicious food for my son-in-law who works outside. If my son-in-law says he doesn't need me later, I plan to leave him without a word. Until then, I will do my best as a wife for him. You can call me a crazy woman. I'm going to live like this